There are fault lines below the surface. That is the warning from the World Bank, which sees the world economy growing at 2.9% this year, up from 2.4% last year, but cautions that 2016 is already shaping up to be quite risky. I think we get the point there. But my point, Larry, is that there are so many emerging nations who are energy importers. I mean, I love the fact that Indonesia is back in OPEC as well, because that means it should be OPEC rather than OPEC, because they're a net importer rather than exporter. But we'll leave that one on the table. There are other nations to talk about, such as India as well. So when I see these fault lines growing on emerging, I say, hang on a second. There are countries there that don't have to subsidise their oil and their product anymore, which are going to absolutely clean up on the back of this. Big countries with 1.3 billion people, such as India. So it's not net necessarily as bad as people are saying, is it?
Well, the problem this time around is that falling oil prices aren't spurring demand as much as historically has been the case. That's especially true in advanced economies, but even in some of the emerging economies that you mentioned. Indonesia is a net oil importer, and from that perspective, it's a beneficiary. So too are India, and they are some of the faster growing emerging economies, but they are small in total comparison to the emerging complex. China remains, of course, the behemoth there. It's also an oil importer, but of course, it's faced with an entirely different set of problems that we're seeing today, for example, that are dominating the outcome. So I think really we're probably looking in the wrong direction.
Okay. In certain cases, they're also removing subsidies as well, so that takes out some of the benefit that you would see from these countries, which I think is an important point here too.
It takes out the benefit, let's say, to the consumer. It's probably a wise decision over time to obviously get the market price for energy in the economy.
Let me be contrarian for a moment here. Sentiment is incredibly negative at the moment around equity, but it's been negative towards emerging market equity for quite some time now. And if you look at the spread between the performance of developed and emerging over the last decade, we are at, I think, a decade low in relation to the value in emerging vs developed. In a world where emerging has already been written off by most market participants, isn't there a risk that there's just a lack of ownership, that very little money will actually start to move some of these markets? And they're not all bad. I mean, I know Turkey's got its terrorism issues, South Africa just looks a real mess at the moment, but Mexico and India are two standouts, and India's probably going to grow faster than China this year. So if you're selective and you pick around, there are some diamonds in the rough.
I think you're headed in the right direction. At the moment, it doesn't feel that way, obviously. There is a sense here of indiscriminate selling, and one can kind of view in that context the situation in China is if you're restricted from selling what you want, you sell what you can, and therefore it has negative spillover effects to all other markets, including to EM. So from that perspective, the indiscriminate nature of selling is both yet at the moment a challenge, but it does, to your point, raise some opportunities here. Having said that, at the index level, if you look at the, say, MSCI EM index and plot it against commodity prices, they're hardly indistinguishable from one another. And so until we actually see a floor under commodity prices, for any number of reasons, China, the dollar, OPEC, whatever they may be, it's going to be very hard for EM to sustain at the broadest level of recovery. Within that, there may be some opportunities.
Yeah,